Hello everyone, welcome to the Engineering Projects YouTube channel. My name is Junaid Shahid. In this video, I'm going to instruct you about the entity framework. So we are using from the couple of series ASP.NET Core application on MVC architecture. And now we are going to work with Entity Framework Core 2.1.11, which will help us to generate dynamical views and to generate the dynamic actions which will perform their operations for CRUD. So we don't need to create CRUD application by our own. We just need to create two things. The first thing, we have to create the repository for entity framework, and the second thing is we have to create our data transfer object, VM, or models, or we can say that in other words, entity classes which can hold the properties of your database columns. So you just need to create these two things, and the rest of thing will be upon the entity framework, especially if you are working in such environment where you have multiple versions of entity framework. Then you have to define which version you are utilizing in your application. So entity framework is most advanced and fast for small applications. Some people rather use it for the large enterprise level application, but I don't recommend that, because I have feel in the large enterprise application there are a lot of stuff we have to do. We have to do a lot of cross joins, and multiple databases are integrated together to work as a standalone application. But entity framework is not able to support multiple databases at the same time, so you have to work with a single database. So let's see what we have done in this tutorial. Now right after this, you have to define what is the architecture and what kind of project you want to create, like you want to create simple MVC or core application. So I'm using the core MVC application and click on next. So it will create a sample project. Remember that we are using core 2.1. I'm telling this because it will help you to integrate entity framework core. Like, you can only install entity framework core version which is compatible with your ASP.NET Core version. Like in this video, we are going to use EF Core 2.1.11, which is compatible with 2.1 ASP.NET Core project. So entity framework will give us features which we cannot get in others data access layers, and which is that it will provide us scaffolding. So scaffolding will give us ease by creating dynamic views and creating dynamic controller actions, so we don't need to work upon these things. Right after the compilation and environment setup in your project, you have to install Entity Framework Core, and you can get this package from NuGet Package Manager for your whole solution. So when this project is configured successfully, I will show you how you can do that. So here is the project which is configured, and now it's time to install Entity Framework Core plugin from NuGet Package Manager. Right click on the solution and search for NuGet Package Manager for solution, and here you have to browse and go for Microsoft Entity Framework.SQL server, and from here we will get this, which is 2.24. For this project I want to add, and from the bottom I can change the version to this, which is compatible with my solution. Okay. Remember one thing more, in my solution I have two versions of Entity Framework. The first version is Entity Framework 6, which is conventional, and the second version we are going to install, and that is Entity Framework Core. So whenever you are working with in such environment where you have multiple versions of Entity Framework, then you have to define in queries that which version you want to entertain to perform a query. Like in the above section, we are going to migrate database from our model and context classes, and for that we have to define for which version we want to migrate. So the NuGet package manager is installing this version, and right after that we have to define a context class and entity class that make up the model. So context class is a kind of repository pattern, and entity class is just a model which is entertained as a data object model, okay, data transfer object model, and so on, what you want to call. So these are helping us to generate dynamic views and dynamic tables in the database. One thing more, I will show you SQL Server. So here we have SQL Server where we did not create any database. It is generated dynamically. In this video we are going to use code first approach. Whenever we create model classes first and database least, this approach is called model first approach, where we will create models, create the structure in the C# and migrate that into the database. So this is all about code first approach. If you have database and you want to create models from that in C#, then that is database first approach, which we are not going to do. So we are building this project from basic. That's why we are using code first approach, because we don't have old architecture which we want to update. So here you can see when I am going to expand databases, here we have EF core basic, which I am going to delete right now, and we will generate that dynamically. It is for some other purpose which I have created. Okay, now from here we have successfully installed the entity framework. Let's go to the models and right click here to create a new model. So I am going to create a simple model which include the primary key and username. Okay, this is class, and name this class as user info model. In this class I am going to create an ID and name of user, just two fields which I want to entertain in this model, because I want to make this tutorial shorter enough and more informative for you. So you have to write prop and double tap this, so it will generate a dynamic property for you. So here we have ID, and let's copy this and paste here and name it as name. Return type is string. I'm going to use data annotation. Okay, what is data annotation? It will help you to define what you want to do with model dynamically. Even you can change the name of column, you can change the name of labels, you can change the data type dynamically, and so forth. You can study that on Google, because this video is not about this, so we are stick to our topic. So here I'm going to add key. This data annotation is representing that if someone create entity framework models or create the controller with the entity framework, then this column will represent it as a primary key during the migration of database. So remember that I am adding this data annotation, and it will represent ID as the primary key of this table. This is just a model right now, it's not table. We are going to create a repo where we will define this is the table. Create another model. Okay, here name it as user repo, which is user repository. You can say user context class and so forth, what you want to call this. It's totally dependent upon, there is no high standards about the naming convention of this thing. Some people call it repository patterns, some call DB context classes. It's totally dependent upon your naming convention. Now we have to extend that with DB context. So DB context is the parent which will allow us to make this possible to generate the dynamic content. So here you can see there is a small option here by which we can use anti-framework core to inherit that. Now we need to create user repo constructor, so it should be public. Okay, paste this, and here we have, and extend that with base options. Okay, I will let you know what is options, and here we will use DB context options, and here in the options we will pass this constructor and create a simple option. Okay, so in the constructor we are passing DB context option parameter, which will allow us to set the optional values like the connection string, name of database, username, password, name of database, name of server, and so forth information which is relevant to the connectivity. Right after this you don't need to write anything here. Okay, right after this we are going to create the tables, dynamic tables. So make it public. DB set is used to define what is the data set. So our data set is type of user info model, and now it's time to write the naming convention for your dynamic table, which is user table get set. So this will get and set the whole table. So we are done with the connectivity and data connection and so forth. Now it's time to register the context or repository with dependency injection. To make this repo available to MVC controller, we will register it as a service in startup.cs class. Service such as this repo are registered with dependency injection during application startup, so that they can provide automatically to components that consume services such as MVC controller via constructor parameter and properties. Okay, it is very simple. You don't need to do anything. Just create string connection string is equal this. Here you have to define only three things. First is server. So how you get the server? Go to your SQL server properties and copy the name from here. Close it and paste that here. Then you have to define database. Name that here as EF core. Okay, so this is the name of our database which we want to create. Okay, now the third and fourth parameter is to, you have to define this connection is trusted underscore connection, which is true because I'm using localhost DB. Then connection retry count, which you can ignore, but let me add that. retry count is equal 0, and that's it. Now you have successfully added the connection string. Now it's time to add the dependency injection with the help of, oops, we don't need that here. Services dot add db context, and here you have to define your repo. Copy the name. So this is our repo which we need to integrate, and here is options lambda options dot SQL server. Use SQL server. Use SQL server, and here you have to pass the connection string. Now add these references from here. As you remember, when I was creating the user repo, I have created the base extended with the options, and now you can understand this option will be passed there as a constructor parameter, and to integrate the data access layer or database with our application. Okay, now we are done with this. Now simply we have to create a new controller. Right click here, add controller, and here you have to define the name of your controller by selecting controller with view using entity framework. Next, now it will ask you about the name of your controller, but before that you have to select the model class, which is user info model. Your your context class, which is user repo, generate view, reference scripts, and so forth. The name of your controller, which is user info controller, and click add. Now the scaffolding process is happening and performing its action. It will dynamically generate your views, dynamically generate your CRUD operations, dynamically generate the action, their action verbs, their parameter, their validations, and so forth information that is happening automatically, which is the real beauty of Entity Framework. So mostly people use Entity Framework because they want to save their time in small projects. Like if someone want to create their small CMS to compete WordPress, or they want simply their own user defined CMS, they can create that in seconds. They just have to define the model classes, they just have to define a repository, and by clicking on add controller with Entity Framework, they can create the whole views in seconds. So you don't need to work or do backward forward approach to render the whole view and to code the whole view. Okay, one thing more amazing is that the UI, which is dynamically generated, is quite enough good for a beginner. Even you can change that UI without changing the major components. You can simply change replacing their CSS, and everything is in your hand. You don't need to work really hard on this. So whenever I have to work on small projects which have a small deadline, or I have to done that in weeks, so I used and prefer Entity Framework to done that. So now you can see after scaffolding is done, here we have actions which are built with the help of Entity Framework, and here you can see link is used here to return different data. If we will talk about get, this is a simple view, and when I will right click here and go to the view, you will see all the controls are generated automatically, like this form is generated automatically. Okay, I didn't create that. And when I will go for the post request, here you can see this is automatically bind with this, and this whole structure will be built automatically. Okay, one thing more, when I will refresh database, there is no database available, and that because we didn't migrate the database. So we have to migrate the database. Either we can migrate, or either we can execute application and that will automatically migrate the database. So the good approach is to migrate by your own self. Click here, package manager console, and you have to write add migration. Add migration. So why it is the good practice? You have hands-on upon the code, and you will get stick to the code, which will be very useful for you in the professional development. So we have write initial create and hit enter. Now it will ask me for which entity framework you want to perform this query, or let's see what it will say. In the package manager console, go to here. Okay, this created that, successfully created. Okay, now here in the package manager console, okay, it's created that. Okay, and here you can see the migration is processed and data snapshot is available here. Now I have to write the query update database and hit enter. So it will generate the database dynamically based upon this data snapshot into our SQL server. It is taking time, it is processing behind the scene. Okay, so it is done. Refresh once again. Go to package manager console, it's working. Here you can see the queries are performing. So it's done. Let's refresh it. And here you can see this is our database, and this is the only one data table. Okay, now we will execute this application. So here you can see our application is executed, and this is the sample data which is not our concern. So we have created this model user info. So we have to go here, user info, and it will redirect to the list by default. And when I click on create, my name is Junaid, create, and it will create the data here. I can edit that to this and save. I can get detail back to the list. I can delete this data. So the whole CRUD operation is performed within seconds, or it is just you have to create repo, context class, and connection string, and do migration of database, and everything is happening behind the scene with the help of scaffolding.